In early America, the colonists would occasionally send young boys to live with the Native Americans to learn the language and the culture of the people. And as a result, the young Englishmen would become translators for the English colonists. They become a shun conduit of diplomacy. With a common nod and a possible handshake, they find agreements. There where everyone shares the same sky but not the same earth. Now, Henry Spelman was one of those boys that were sent to live with the Powhatan at first, then later the Potomac people. Henry Spelman arrived in Virginia in the year 1609. Henry would later write in his journal of what life was like living with the natives of the area. He wrote in the perspective of an adolescent who seemed to be adopted by the two different groups of people of America, with empathy and connection, an inherited family tree that he kept to own. They became his own people, his friends, his family. Henry was sold to the chief named Wahun Seneca, who was sometimes called Powhatan, referred to as Powhatan. Henry was sort of a diplomat that would be adopted by these native tribes, and the Powhatan chief had sometimes sent Pocahontas to accompany the people on a visit to Jamestown. There was connection and a small space between their trusts. Now, Henry lived with another young man named Thomas Savage in the natives' capital. He didn't like living with the Powhatan, but Spelman said that the Potomac treated him with kindness and affection in a degree that Henry didn't receive from the English and the Powhatan. Although Henry couldn't leave the tribe unless one of the Englishmen paid for his return, in which Samuel Argyle eventually did. When Henry arrived at Jamestown, he had a big welcoming. He mentioned that it was joyful. Everybody was clapping their hands and be like, "Welcome here, child." John Smith was one of the people, was there. Henry Spelman referred to Powhatan as Little Powhatan in his writings. Here's the actual sentence. I'll start kind of in the middle of the paragraph. It says, "A fortnight," which means a couple of weeks. "In viewing the country, I was carried by Captain John Smith, our president, to the falls, to the Little Powhatan, where, unknown to me, he sold me to him for a town called Powhatan, and leaving me with him, the Little Powhatan." Henry mentioned that he was with this Little Powhatan for 7 or 8 days, and the Little Powhatan was giving him things to win him over. But why was he having to win him over to live with him? It doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's what is written. He doesn't go into exact detail in his writings. So I'm not thinking the Little Powhatan is the chief. Could be. They could have been a short guy and they called him the Little Powhatan. But then there was this moment, and John Smith came and spoke with Powhatan. John Smith got into an argument with Captain West at this moment. So when Smith arrived to the Powhatan, he asked the Powhatan if they could kill West for him. But the English company learned about this, and then they had Smith arrested and put on a ship sent back to England. George Percy then became the president, according to Spelman's book. Thomas Savage came with the 4 or 5 Powhatan to deliver some venison, and to take Henry Spelman with them back to the Powhatan town. Spelman went willingly because the English lacked resources. They didn't have a lot of food, so he thought he would be doing better with the Powhatan anyways. He said, "I'm going with those guys. You guys have some fun over here. Have fun chewing on those naked corn cobs." Spelman had a hatchet and some copper with him. Then he left the group, and when he arrived, Spelman gave these as gifts to Chief Powhatan, in which he well received. "Thanks for this hatchet, son." Chief Powhatan had Spelman go to the English and inform them of trade, and tell them that he wanted to trade corn and copper with them. And so the English accepted, and they said, "Okay, we'll come there by boat." And they came by boat. And the Powhatan received them well and gave them lodging. And when they came to trade, the English were shown half barrels of corn, although the Powhatan were pushing the bottom of the corn up so it looked like it was full. And they're like, no, man, you guys are bluffing. Hey, you see this guy over here? He's pushing up the bottom of the corn so it looks like there's more. Forget it. We're not deal. It's no deal. No deal. The Powhatan looked at him and he's just like, for you, $20. While pushing up the height with their hands underneath as a deceitful trick. But the English knew it was a scam. So they started to argue. And the Indians appeared from the cornfields and started to shoot their arrows, which caused the English to take the corn and run. But the Powhatan ended up killing 26 out of 28 of those Englishmen. And with the guy named William Russell and his acquaintance were the only two that survived, who escaped back to Jamestown by land. They left the boat there. They said, screw the boat. Spelman, Savage, stayed with the Powhatan after that. Spelman stayed with the Powhatan for about 3 or 4 months after that. The Chief Powhatan became distant in communication with the boys for a duration of months. You're not opening up. You're not talking to me. Why not? What are you hiding from me? When the Chief Potomac came to visit the Powhatan, now the 3 English boys, Savage, Samuel, which was a Dutchman, and Spelman, saw how kind this chief was to them, and that the boys wanted to go with him. And after they left the Powhatan, about a mile or 2 walk, Thomas Savage wanted to return to the Powhatan. But the Powhatan wanted all the boys to return, so they chased after the group. There's been writings, I've read that in other documents, that this child, Savage, went back to Powhatan and told him, hey, everybody's getting away. Go catch him. They say he was kind of a traitor to him. So Samuel and Spelman didn't want to go back to the Powhatan, so the Indians came to them. The Powhatan came to them and started fighting with them. And they struck an axe into the head of Samuel, killing him, the Dutchman, now dead, while Spelman ran away to freedom in a Potomac countryside. And Powhatan chased him all the way there. Now Spelman lived with the Potomac for little more than a year in an Indian town called Paxtanzi. Captain Argo was on his way to see about another English boy named Harry, who was supposed to be in another Indian town called Nakotautanki. So Argo started down the river after he heard that Spelman was down the ways. And Chief Potomac heard of this and sent Spelman to receive Argo halfway. And when Spelman made his way back to the settlement with the Chief Argo, Spelman asked the English if he could give the chief some copper. So when they got there, the chief received the copper from the English. Then Spelman made his way back to England. And when he went back to England at this time, he wrote about everything that he said that he's seen while living with the Native Americans at the time. And Spelman began describing some of the culture of the native people. He says that they worship the devil, he wrote. But every sect of them has several images in which they call God, in which Spelman refers to them all as a devil. He mentions a few by name: Kakuis, Manato, Talkinj, Suk, Quikwasak, although the Powhatan chief had a god named Kakeas, and this Kakeas sat in a special house that Spelman referred to as the God's house. The King of England gave Powhatan a bed from England, and the Powhatan kept this bed in the God's house along with the presents sent to him, such as corn and beads. Also in this house, this God's house, are all the family of the kin of Powhatan buried in the place. The Potomac country had a god called Quioquasaki, in which they give the gifts of beads and copper to this god to ask for rain. Or when it rains too much, they give gifts to stop it raining. It's like, man, it's been raining for days, man. Stop that rain from coming here, man. Here's some beads, here's some corn. I hope you eat it. I hope you enjoy it. You ain't got no butter, but, enjoy it. Spelman wrote that once a year they have a special day of worship. And on this day they go to the woods, create a bonfire, and offer 2 or 3 children to the god, tossing the children into the fire. The Powhatan adults listen for a noise from the fire, which signifies which children are to be thrown in. And after the children are burned to death in the fire, the natives leave the area rejoicing, but the women follow behind while they weep. Spelman describes the landscape. He says that the area is full of trees in some parts, while sometimes small fields to grow corn. Lots of water and marshy areas are separated by the others. The wildlife consists of deer, goats, country lions, bears, wolves, foxes, muskrats, bears, flying squirrels the natives call asapamik. Then he also saw gray squirrels, peacocks, and common hens. And he also said there's an abundance of fish that are there. For food, they had a kind of wheat that they called locotons. Plus they had peas and beans, walnuts, which were growing everywhere, Spelman wrote. But no orchard fruits, but of two kinds of plums. And of the native country, they have a few towns, with the largest town not having more than 20 or 30 houses in it. These houses he described as looking like ovens with a small hole for an entry and a larger hole on top for the smoke. The kings of the towns had longer and wider houses than anyone else as well. They're like, you live in a little house. I'm chief. I get the big house. I got a lot of wives. Lots of wives means lots of children. Lots of wives also means lots of friends that want to come by and see these women. Now these natives, they had many wives, and the wives take care of the houses when the men go hunting. The houses are built with some kind of mats. While the men are hunting, the women will follow with these mats, and when they reach wherever direction that they arrive in, the women would set up the house until they need to tear it down again when they have to travel for hunting reasons. Now for hunting, Spelman somewhat describes a slash and burn technique. The natives surround an area with animals. They light their arrows on fire, then all at once shoot into the field, burning the earth, while the animals start running away from the fire. The natives shoot the animals to death, then skin them, which they treasure the skins the most, but they also eat the flesh. We could see this practice throughout all of America at that time. But as for the women, the marriage, the men have many wives. Each man has a bunch of wives, a piece for every man. They purchase these wives with beads, copper, and whatever else Spelman wrote. Firstly, they have sex with the women if they are attracted. Then, if everything goes well, the man will go to the parents or kinfolk if no parents are available and ask for marriage and amount of payment and how much they want for the girl. If the sum is agreed upon, they will deliver this wife to the man the next day. The marriage ceremony is that of the parents bringing the daughter between them, or the kinfolk if the parents are dead. Then they bring the woman to the man and bound their hands together. Then they take a long string with beads on it, measure it at arm's length, and tie the two people's hands together, then given to the father of the woman. And after that, they have a feast and they're married, and that's it. The chief has a similar process, except he pays whatever he wants for the women. He's like, hey, I want to buy your daughter or your people. And like, okay, $20. He's like, no, $5. No, 20. No, I said 5. Okay. So then they go and make love. That's right. Then they go and make some love. That's right. Then they have some children. And now they name their children, Spelman wrote. After a few days of having a child, the neighbors and everyone would come together in this house of the person. And everyone comes to the house. And then the father comes, takes the baby in his hands, then looks at the baby and says, okay, this is what the baby's name is. Then everybody starts celebrating. And that's it. That's how the babies were named. That's what Spelman wrote. Why would he even write that? It's not fun to listen, hear, and know about. So the father names the kid. Is that the whole point? It would be more fun if he took the baby out into the woods and in the first animal you seen doing something like the flying bird. I'd be like, I named the kid Flying Bird because I saw a bird. Or the running wolf, The child's name is Running Wolf because when a baby was born, I saw a wolf running. Or a drowning fish. What's your name? Drowning fish? Okay. There was a day that Spelman was left with Potawomac's brother, in which he referred to this brother's name was past tense. Spelman wrote, Potomac left to visit another chief in another town, and while he left 2 of his wives with Spelman in the house of Papstance. And after the chief departed, one of the wives, named Papa Whiskey, wanted to give a visit to her father. And she elected Spelman to come along and have him carry her baby, had him carry the baby for her. And it turned into a really long trip to visit her father, and Spelman complained that it was difficult to carry the child all the way. And upon refusing, the chief's wife struck Spelman 3 or 4 times with some mighty blows. Spelman rose from the ground and tackled the woman to the ground, beating her. Another wife of the chief caught eye of this little battle between the chief's wife and Spelman, and so this other wife came and she ran to help. Now both women were on top of Spelman, beating him. That's all Spelman wrote of this. Then later, when the chief came back home, Spelman told the chief of what happened. The chief then took some type of iron called a Kawaskohaken and went to beat his wife with it. Some kind of iron called a Kawaskohaken. And he started beating these women. Now Potomac hit this wife to the ground. And it seemed that she was dead when she laid there, Spelman wrote. And Spelman wrote that he ran away into the chief's brother's house. Then the anger of the chief scared him, but eventually the wife got back up on her feet and talked the chief out of his anger. She's like, come on, baby, you don't want to do this to me. We go inside the tent, make it all right. She's like, yeah. He's like, yeah, man, whatever you say. The next morning, Potomac chief came to Spelman at the place he was staying, at his brother's place. And Henry was afraid of the chief still, and thought he was still mad. But the chief presented himself kindly to Spelman, and the chief asked how Henry was doing and how he was feeling. He's like, what? And asked if he was still afraid of him since he seen Spelman run away. Henry asked about the wife that he beat, and the chief replied, she's fine. Don't worry about her. She's all right. All is well. I said, okay, cool. It seemed pretty crazy yesterday when he did that. The chief asked Spelman to go with him to his house. And later, Spelman wrote that the chief told him that he loved him, that he loved Spelman, and that nobody will hurt Spelman. And his wife hurt him, so he beat his wife. And therefore, nobody will hurt Spelman after this. And in the background, the chief's wife was giving dirty looks to Henry. In the distance, he's seen her. She's like giving him, if looks could kill. Henry disregarded the dirty looks because he trusted the chief when the chief told Henry that nobody will hurt him. The chief also told Henry to ask the English for some more copper when they visit. And like I had mentioned earlier, when Argo finally came, he gave the chief what Spelman promised. He would give the chief some copper and some beads. It was all about the money. He said, I'll beat my wife for you, man. All you gotta do is just give me some copper. He said, all right, we'll do. So Spelman wrote. Now, Henry Spelman initially thought the natives were lawless, but they had laws and punishment, like he did, the chief did to his wife. Spelman wrote that he witnessed 5 executions, which 4 of these executions were because the men killed a child and its mother, Spelman wrote. The 5th executed witness, the fifth that was executed witnessed the crime, but didn't tell anyone. So they're like, you're dead. See what you do? When you don't open your mouth, you're dead. That's it. Thanks for coming. Another person was killed for robbing a traveler, while death is punishment for thieves in this land, in the natives' land of the area. Another law was made that no man was to sleep with another man's wife, while death was the punishment. And Henry didn't mention if he witnessed any of these executions. They're like, you cheated, now we're going to kill you. He didn't say if the women were killed, but it seems like the men were punished and killed for sleeping with another man's wife. So it was definitely the man, not the women. Like in Muslim lands, like if a woman goes out and has sex with somebody else or gets raped by somebody else, they kill the women, they punish the women. It's the opposite here in the native lands. The executions were performed in front of the chief's house, Spelman wrote. The prisoners had their hands and legs tied, and they cut off their long hair that was hung from the left side of their head. And after it was cut, it was hung by the chief's house. The people that were tried for murder were beaten until their bones were broken, and then they were burned in a fire. But the thief, he was knocked on his head and also thrown in a fire. So he died a little bit easier because he was like kind of asleep. When it is time to eat meat, the men and women eat separately. The women prepare the food, and when it comes time to eat, the woman brings everybody some meat, and nobody gets seconds. But if somebody doesn't finish, the woman will take the meat and save it for the next meal. And after the meal is finished, they would bow their head and pray thanks, Spelman wrote. Now, Spelman wrote of how the people looked. He says the chief doesn't look much different from the rest of the people. They all shave one side of their head by plucking out their hair, and all the men pull out their facial hair as well, while only the chief sometimes has a beard. They shave the side of their head because they don't want their hair to interfere with their bow and arrows. So if they're like right-handed, they will shave the right side of their head, in which they mention here. A lot of the documents I've ever read that they always shave the right side of the head, so they're all right-handed. I don't know, maybe there was a left-hander. They just didn't mention it. Or maybe the majority of them were right-handed. In war, they used a bow and arrow, a tomahawk, and a weapon like a hammer. They had little armor in which was tree bark that hangs on their left arm to protect them when in battle. Though they mostly used trees for defense while reloading their arrows. Henry only seen one battle, and it was with the Potomac and the Massawomac. And the Massawomac arrived on boats of hollowed out logs. And after a while of the battle, the Massawomac retreated, and they're like, we give up. They didn't have drums, and they didn't have trumpets, but they howled. So Henry also describes of the people the sports that they played when they weren't at war, eating or having sex, getting married, or laying around. He says they would have some sports, and Henry says that they had a type of football game similar to that of England, Spelman says. He says that they don't push each other or tackle each other like they do in England. He says that the football game is played exclusively by women and children, while the men play a different game. The men play a sort of game where they drop a ball from the air and kick it as far as they could. And the person that kicks the farthest is the winner. That's what the men play, and the women play football. Kind of odd. And Henry says, at feasts, they would gather around a man with a pipe and a rattle. And when the man starts to make a rattle, everyone starts to wring their necks and stomp their feet on the ground. And the women and men would dance together, while the women sometimes followed behind the men. So these are all the things that Henry Spelman, was witnessing. No. Henry Spelman arrived in Jamestown just prior to the starving time in 1609. A good reason for him not to mind living with the natives rather than with the English, because they were all starving about that time. Argo paid for Spelman's return to the English in 1611, just a couple years later, and then Henry went back to England in the year 1613 while making various trips back and forth to the colonies. Eventually, Henry married a Native American woman who was named Martha Fox, some say. They would eventually have some descendants. Spelman was an interpreter for the natives and the English while he lived in the area for the time. And although in the year 1623, Spelman and his group were attacked by the Anacostan natives, unto where Spelman and 19 of his people were killed while they were on a trading expedition. So, that's all the time you get for jumping back into the past and checking out what it was like in the 17th century through the words of Spelman, or his perspective at least. If you search online, you'll see that there'll be other perspectives written in various different places, but we're going to cover all that stuff. I'm just going over what this guy said in his memoir, or his journal, or his perspective. So if you want to check out Spelman's book, you could get it easily. So anyways, that's it. I don't think I need to ask anybody to subscribe. I think everybody knows how to do that already. Don't need to ask. Adios.